In the beginning of the Bible, a snake tempts Eve into eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. She then gets Adam to also eat of it. This causes the fall, and humanity falls from grace and is kicked out of the Garden of Eden. This is the problem that the Bible presents at its core. The fact that human beings are tainted by original sin and in need of salvation. Reading the opening lines of the second chapter of Genesis and so forth, you come across the story of Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve is an odd story because God seemed to punish all of mankind for the actions of Adam and Eve when Adam and Eve, if you read it in English, appear not to know what good or evil is, and therefore, how could they be expected to choose good and to not choose evil? But if you read it in a way which is less familiar for English readers of the Bible, or you read the English of the Bible in the type of context of the Bible, you get a slightly different meaning for the word know, which is the root word which appears within the Hebrew, where it refers to the knowledge of good and evil. And that's an interesting sort of phrase within the biblical terminology, because what you actually turn up with, what you actually end up with, is an idea of covenant, of a sort of family knowledge. When God and Abraham make their covenant and God walks through those sort of split carcasses, that's a type of ancient vow, a type of ancient system where if someone violates their oath, then the bad sort of things would happen to them as though they were the animals which were cut in half or so forth. And covenant appears throughout the Bible, and Jesus in the New Testament says that of the people who he would send to hell, they might say whatever it is about knowledge of him, but he'd say, I don't know you. And you also have the idea in the New Testament of mere knowledge of God is something that even the demons have. So what does the word know mean within Genesis, within the story of Adam and Eve? And it could well mean, as people usually interpret it, as that people were simply naive and didn't have a knowledge of good and evil before the fall. But knowledge can also mean alliance, can also mean covenant, can also mean entering into a family relationship, which is what covenant did. It made the participants in the covenant as though they were family to one another. And that's quite an important distinction, at least in my mind. And that's a distinction which gives us the sense that perhaps the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because the God in the Old Testament doesn't say, if you take of this tree before I give it to you, then all of this evil will happen and you will surely die. No, he says, if you take of the tree, you will surely die. And in fact, when you take of the tree, you will surely die. And that could seem quite cruel if it were something that God was just waiting until man was ready to be given it. And perhaps that interpretation is correct, but the way I read it, when you look at the original wording of the actual verses and the actual chapter, I read it slightly differently, and I read it as by eating of the fruit of the tree of good and evil, you are eating of the fruit of the tree of a covenant, a family relationship with both good and evil. And that, in a sense, gets down to the heart of man after the fall. That gets down to the sense of why we would be so what we are, so failed and so incapable of good, and yet capable of a greater degree of good than if we were purely evil. It's a sort of this idea that mankind is in a relationship and an alliance with both good and evil until such point as man chooses either good or evil, and within the Christian sense chooses God, chooses a covenant with God, chooses knowledge and family relationship with God, in the sense that a Christian is deemed a child of God, in the sense that Christians would consider themselves to have the blood of Christ and body of Christ, which they receive in the Eucharist or so forth, and death through baptism, a new life as an adopted child of God. So the type of language which you get within the second chapter and third chapter and so forth of Genesis, within that story of Adam and Eve, if it's a sense of the fruits of being allied in family both to the devil and to God, the sort of split loyalty, then it has a different sort of meaning. It has a meaning which gels much better with the elements of the story, and it has a meaning which, where you see the root word of know used throughout much of the Old Testament, it's a sense of knowing God is not simply knowing of God, but having a sort of deep relationship with God. And knowing good and evil could be in the sense of having a deep relationship with both good and evil, having this sort of split loyalty. And for me, that is a deeper meaning that I see within that book of Genesis and within those chapters of Genesis which deal with Adam and Eve.